Today, I'll show you how to sew up these drawstring gift bags. These are really fast and easy to sew up, and I'll show you how to do it next. The things you're going to need to sew up these Christmas gift bags are 2 pieces of fabric that measure 2.5 inches by 31 inches, and these are going to be our strings for our drawstring gift bag. You're going to need a piece of fabric for the outside of the bag, and you're also going to need a piece of fabric for the lining that measures 31 inches by 21.5 inches. You're also going to need your sewing machine with coordinating thread. I'm just going to use red today. And your iron and ironing board. Now, I got this idea from Vanessa over at the Crafty Gemini. I've only been sewing for about 4 years now, and the 2 YouTube channels that I watched to teach me how to sew was Vanessa from the Crafty Gemini and Jenny Doan from the Missouri Star Quilt Company. Some of you people out there like to clock me for doing things wrong, or maybe not doing things the way you do them. But listen, I'm just a boy with a sewing machine. I'm just trying to show you how to do things that works for me with the materials that you have. Let's get started. The first thing you're going to want to do is to take one of your pieces of bag fabric, and we're going to lay it with the pretty sides facing up. Next, we're going to take, in my case, the lining fabric, and we're going to match up our edges. And we're going to lay this so the pretty sides are touching. Now you just want to put a few pins on the sides. Now we're just going to take this over to our sewing machine, and with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, we're going to sew up both sides, making sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Just like that. And I did that to both of the short ends. Now you just want to grab your ironing board. We're going to open essentially our tube up, and we're going to press our seams. Now I like to press one of our seams towards the outside fabric, and then press our other seam towards the lining fabric. Just like that. Now I'm getting over a cold, so I apologize for any sniffles or coughs you may hear in this video. The next thing that we want to do is we're going to match up our seams here. And because we pressed one seam going one way and the one seam going the other way, they will nestle up just perfect. And I like to stick a pin. And now we're going to iron a crease right here on both edges of our fabric. And you should have something that looks like this. Now our next step we're going to do is we're going to make a bunch of marks. So I'm just going to use a regular pen. And the first set of marks we're going to do on each corner, here, and then also on the opposite side, we're going to put an inch over and an inch up and draw a square. Just like that. And we're going to do the same thing with the lining piece. An inch up and an inch over. and make a square. Now on your lining piece, I'm going to use this gold fabric. You just want to make a 4-inch opening somewhere here on the side. And this is going to be our opening to turn our bag. Now we're just going to rotate this around again. Now on our outside facing fabric, from our seam line here, we want to measure over 1 inch and make a mark. So I'm just going to put my inch line right here on the seam and draw a line. And then from that mark, you want to do 1 inch over and put another mark. And when we go to sew these together, we're going to leave this part open, and that'll be our casing for our drawstrings. Now you just want to repeat that on the top. So 1 inch over from our seam line, make a mark, and 1 inch over from that mark, another one. Should look like that. Now you just want to grab your fabric scissors, and on these squares that we drew on the corner, we're going to cut them out. Alright guys, now we're going to take these over to our sewing machine and we're going to sew the sides together. So what we're going to do is we're going to start right here, back stitching at the beginning. We're going to sew all the way down till we get to our first pin mark, which is right here. And we're going to back stitch. You then want to raise your presser foot and your needle, and we're just going to move our fabric down until we get to our second mark. We're going to leave this part unsewn, but you don't have to break your thread. You can just trim it when we're done sewing. So then we're going to back stitch at our second mark, and we're going to sew all the way down till we get to our end, making sure to back stitch. We're going to do the exact same thing on the top side. We're going to start here, back stitch, sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance till we get to our first mark, back stitch, move our project down till we get to the second mark, back stitch, and we're going to sew all the way down until we get to our opening. Now you guessed it, we're going to back stitch at the first mark, leave this opening unsewn, start right back sewing at our second mark, back stitch, sew all the way down, and back stitch. And I'll show you what this looks like over at the sewing machine. Alright guys, so like I said, I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to start, this is my lining piece, start sewing, back stitch, alright guys, so I'm coming up to my first mark for our casing. I'm going to sew right up to that line, back stitch. I'm going to lift my needle, raise my presser foot, and I'm just going to extend my project until I get to the second mark. Okay, so now I'm going to start sewing, backstitch, and then continue my seam all the way down. Backstitching at the end. Now we're just going to turn our project over and do the same thing. Alright, I reached my first mark, backstitch, raise my needle, raise my presser foot, advance to your next mark, backstitch, and just keep sewing. Now I reached my first mark to my opening in the lining, backstitch, move down till you get to your second line, backstitch, and keep sewing. And as always, make sure to backstitch at the end. Now you can just go and clip these threads on your opening and on your casing. Now after I clipped all my threads, the next thing we're going to do is box our corners. So what you want to do is open up the corners. And I like to line up this crease with our seam here and put a pin. Now these are not going to line up pretty. I don't know if you can see that or not, but there's going to be extra fabric on one side, and that's just how you want it. When we take these over to our sewing machine, we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so that's going to cover up any of this. If you want, you could go ahead and just use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And we're going to do that to all the corners. Just like that. Now, like I said, I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine, and with a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch seam allowance, we're going to sew right across here, backstitching at the beginning and the end on all 4 corners. Alright guys, now that we've sewed our corners together, you now want to turn your bag inside out, and to do that, you just want to go to your opening in the lining and push all this material through it. It's also a good idea to take a chopstick or a bone folder and poke out your corners. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to close our opening to the lining here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick a couple pins in here. And I'm going to take this back to my sewing machine, and starting about a 1/2 inch away from the opening on this side, I'm going to start backstitch and sew with about an 1/8 inch seam allowance all the way down to about a 1/2 inch past the bottom of the opening. Now I'm just going to go ahead and use the red thread that's already in my machine, because this is the inside of the bag and no one's really going to see it. But if you want to, you could match your thread to the lining fabric, or go ahead and hand sew this closed. Just like that. Now our next step is we're going to tuck our lining into the bag. So you just kind of want to open up your bag and stuff the lining in. Give it a shake. And I just like to stick my hands in here to the corners and make sure that they're laying nice. And at the top here, you just kind of want to roll where your seam is and take it over to your ironing board and give it a good press. Alright guys, I have the top here nice and pressed. Now I'm just going to take this back over to my sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch the edge about 1/8 of an inch all the way around. Back stitching at the beginning and the end. And I like to start right here at one of the seams. Just like that. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to sew our stitch lines for our casing. Now if you remember, we measured 1 inch down and then 2 inches down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my edge of my fabric with the 1 inch mark on my sewing machine. And like I said, starting right here on the seam, I'm going to sew all the way around, backstitching at the beginning and the end. Then without even cutting my threads, I'm going to move down. And my sewing machine did not have a 2 inch mark, so what I did was measure 2 inches away from my needle and I put a piece of tape. So then I'm going to follow my edge of my fabric with my tape and I'm going to sew all the way around. And that'll give us our casing for our strings. Now I'll take you over to the sewing machine and show you what I mean. Alright guys, I'm over here at my sewing machine as you can see. And if you can, remove your accessories tray to expose your free arm. This does help a lot. So right here on my sewing machine is my 1 inch mark. So for the first seam, I'm just going to line up the edge of my fabric with that 1 inch mark. I'm going to backstitch at the beginning and the end, and slowly, just so. Now, without even cutting my threads, this tape mark right here is 2 inches away from my needle. So I'm going to lift my presser foot, move my fabric down, making sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end, and just sew that seam. Just like that. And then just clip your threads. And now you can see that we have our 2 lines here, and that forms our casing for our strings. Now you just want to set this off to the side for a minute and grab your 2.5 by 31 inch strips. Now what we're going to do to make these strings for our bags, I've done this technique a few times in my other videos. So we're going to take this over to our ironing board. We're going to fold it in half the long way and give it a press. Now we're going to open this up and we're going to fold each side in towards that crease we just made and give that a press. Now just fold it over on that original crease and give it a press. And it should look something like this. Now you want to do that to both pieces of your 2.5 by 31 inch fabric. And now we're just going to take this back to our sewing machine, and with an 1/8 inch seam allowance, we're going to sew all the way down our side, creating our string. You do want to backstitch at the beginning and the end, and I like to do a good 1/2 inch backstitch here. So I'll sew down a 1/2 inch, go back a 1/2 inch, and then keep on sewing, because at the end I am going to clip with my pinking shears just so nothing frays. Just like that. Now you just want to grab a safety pin. We're going to stick it through one end of our string here. You want to grab your bag and we're just going to string it through. So what you want to do is just push the fabric onto the safety pin and pull. When you get to the other opening here, you just want to keep on going until you get to right where you started. Just like that. Remove your safety pin. And then I just like to tie it in a knot. Give it a good tug. And then on the ends here, I just like to take my pinking shears and give it a snip. Now just grab your other tie, put your safety pin on the end. We're going to go to the opposite side that we just did, and we're going to string this all the way through till it comes out the other end. Now just tie that in a knot. And give it a trim. And just like that, our Christmas gift bag is complete. Now to use it, all you got to do is pull the sides. Because this bag is nice and big, it'll fit plenty of treats or any of those weird shaped items that are just a pain to wrap. My finished bag is about 11 inches wide by 15 inches tall. So you could stuff plenty of things in this bag. I hope you give this project a try. If you like my videos and want to see more of my videos, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below and give it a big thumbs up. If you have any questions about this video or any of my other videos, or would like to leave a suggestion for a future upcoming video, leave me a comment. Feel free to share this across your social medias. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time. And hope you have a happy holiday.